Helen, thanks so much for joining us on the She's Gods podcast. For people who don't know who you are yet, I'm sure lots do. We'd like to talk a bit about what you do and who you are, and a bit about FOUDYS and so on.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. My name's Helen, a big football fan, primarily a shirt collector. Been a football shirt collector since I was a little girl. And I launched a business in, the end of 2020. It was December 13th, 2020. So it still counts 2020. That sells specifically women's football rhetoric. So like women's football specific shirts with the correct names on the back, sports bras, period products, like anything to do with being a female footballer or being a fan of the women's game.
What sparked the idea behind the women's football angle of it? What sparked that?
I think for me, I just had spent so many years in the men's football game, being able to access whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted it. I remember just you go to Barcelona and you could get yourself a Messi shirt on every street corner. And it was just so easily accessible. And in 2019, I remember they announced, we are going to make World Cup kits for the women's national teams that are specific to the women's teams. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
This is so exciting. I'm a shirt collector. So I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be unreal. And then they started releasing them and they were iconic. I don't know if you remember the England Red Roses shirt from 2019. One of my favorite football shirts ever, just so stunning. Got to France to the World Cup and we were at the Norway-England game where Lucy Bronze scored that unreal goal from outside the area, and there was nobody wearing the women's shirts. They're all wearing Beckham shirts. There were USA fans in the crowd. They were wearing shirts with no star above the crest to represent their 3 World Cups at the time. I'm like, why is no one wearing the women's shirts? And essentially it was accessibility. They were like, these shirts are being made, but we just don't know where to find them. And when you go on the major retailers before the World Cup, you're saying England World Cup shirt, the consumer wasn't educated on accessing these products. They were just searching on the homepage of Sports Direct for England home shirt, and they were coming up with a Beckham shirt. And I was like, surely I can do something about this. So when I got back to the UK, the first step that I made was I found the rights to sell the WSL lettering, and we were the first people, I was the first person in my bedroom selling WSL font other than Arsenal. Arsenal were the only club doing it, and every other club, Manchester United, Manchester City, none of them were selling WSL shirts at the time in 2019, 2020, which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, I guess what impact does that have on, little girls? They can't, find a shirt to wear. I mean, what impact does that have on them? Does it, only be able to find a Beckham shirt? I mean, that's not good.
It's not ideal at all. And I think what I noticed was I went to Manchester City women's game at the start of the new season. And at the time, Steph Horton was the captain, and Steph Horton was playing a load of games. And she'd just been the captain for England at the World Cup. I'm looking across the crowd and all I can see is Aguero shirts. I'm like, how could you be a Man City fan that has put the effort in to come here to Manchester City's stadium to watch this women's team and stood at the back of this crowd? And I'm looking out and I'm like, as far as the world is concerned outside of this building, you're all men's football fans because you're all wearing Premier League shirts. And I just think brand awareness for me is a key opportunity to grow and increase participation, increase interest in a product. I just think the equivalent would be Heinz beans just being we're not going to put our logo anywhere, just buy beans, but hopefully you choose ours. It's there's no brand awareness to the WSL if people aren't wearing the WSL shirts, and they're so specific and the badges are so much nicer as well than the Premier League badge, but I'm a bit biased.
Yeah. Why do you think this, so there's obviously a merch gap and there still is today, why do you think that exists when you look back to the history of women's football to now? Why do you think that even happened in the first place?
I think the merchandise gap still exists because being honest, you have to see it to be it, and I'm the only female CEO of a sports retail company in the world. So sorry, being specific, a football sports retail company in the world. I don't know about other sports, but in licensed football goods, the people at the top are primarily white men. And when that happens, primarily what's happening is they're focused on the sports and interests that they have, or statistically that they're being told are interesting. So men's football, which I love, by the way, has 120, 150 year run up. And so they're like, loads of people like it. It's a £1 billion industry. Let's just, the quote I keep using, let's fish where there are fish. Like, men's football's a huge, huge pond, an ocean. And then women's football over here, they're not really noticing it. And it's funny because it's going under the radar despite the fact it grew last year, I think 3,000% in terms of interest in the WSL.
Yeah.
So like, that is like unheard of. I think comparably they say men's football is growing on average 24% year on year. So you've got like this massive growth over here, and still, because men's football is so humongous, we're not noticing it. We're not noticing this massive growth. Kind of, to be honest with you, long may it continue.
So what needs to change? Like, obviously, like you said, it's massive growth with She Scores. I try and push that on my platform, and I put it on my stories and my feed about the different parts of women's football that aren't being noticed. And obviously I've grown to 30,000 followers as a result of that.
Incredible.
Like, what more needs to be done to get that out there? Does there need to be more social media platforms? Does there need to be more players talking about it? Do brands need to talk about it? We'll go on to Klarna in a second. They're obviously helping now, getting involved and everything. What else needs to be done, do you think?
Sounds like you probably know as much, if not more, than I do about what needs to be done, because you've got a 30,000 platform. That's incredible. And you keep hearing of this more and more in the women's football space because the interest is there and people want to be educated on it. And I think that's something that's really interesting in the women's game, is like, I think if I go to a local pub in Newcastle where I'm from before a match day in Newcastle, I'm telling you now, all of the people in that pub can tell you probably to the kilogram the weight of Alexander Isak. They can tell you his age, they can tell you his bio, tell you what town he's from in Sweden. In women's football, this information was not accessible, is not accessible. So platforms like yours are educating the consumer on players, giving you a little bit of personality, a little bit of history, a little bit of storytelling. And like, it's just natural human behavior. Like, I'm more interested when I know, like, oh, like, what town's Chloe Kelly from? Oh, no way. That's really interesting. That's so cool. Oh my God, her mum did this. That's really cool. What school did she go to? Like, hearing Keely Hodgkinson and Ella Toone went to school together, like the Olympic gold athlete and the European champion. It's like, that is such a cool story, right? And I think women's football, we're starting to hear these stories because of platforms like yours, and that's really helping. But in terms of brands and what they're bringing to the party, like Klarna, these pieces of research just, I think, further drive me forwards in one way. Like, seeing that research and being like, I knew I wasn't going down like the wrong path. I knew this was a legitimate commercial business opportunity, and Klarna's research has evidenced that. But also platforms like Klarna are able to blow something up much more quickly than you or I, because of the sheer volume of people that have eyes on what they're doing. So it's so helpful to have brands that are heavily involved in supporting the growth of the game. How
did the partnership between you and Klarna come about then? How did that all start?
Like, what I've heard, and this could be like completely true, you might have to cut this from the podcast, is that they did the research, and through the research they discovered FOUDYS, because essentially what the research is doing is talking about this merchandise gap. And the first piece that they're doing in the research as well is anybody providing this service. And then when you Google it and when you're searching for it and when you're kind of delving into it, our name just keeps coming up, FOUDYS.
Yeah.
And I think as part of that, they were like, well, we need to talk to the person behind FOUDYS. And I found the relationship really authentic. It was really real. It was really helpful talking to people that kind of got it as well. It didn't feel like it was kind of one layer of like, we're trying to do this to help to speak to our audience. It felt really multi-layered, and doing conversations like this is beneficial to both sides, because it's educating the consumer and the listener and the person that's out there listening to the podcast, but it's also helping to spread the word and grow the women's game.
Yeah, it's crazy, because even when like Klarna, seeing the stat that they brought to the table to me, it blew my mind. Just I didn't even realise how much women's football, the merchandise was growing, and I'm a platform around women's football, which makes me sound really bad, but it's just because the information's not really out there. You haven't got kind of like the top brands necessarily pushing it out there. You haven't got the top media platforms pushing it out there. So it's really good what you're doing. And I have got one of your shirts here, which I'll try and present anyway in a small space. Just turn it around. But yeah, what does the 78 on the back represent out of interest?
So the shirt itself is like, it's a bit discombobulated. I absolutely love that word. I'm using it loads at the moment. It sounds dead clever.
It's passed to you.
So Sophie Hird designed this. Sorry, I keep on knocking the mic. So Sophie Hird designed this, and she's an incredible designer. She also plays football in the amateur space. So I play football in the amateur space as well. So these, like, in this inclusive women's football world, Sophie and I had actually met before, but we hadn't known because we'd met on the football pitch. And what she did is she wanted to make it that it just wasn't quite right. Like, you can see the collars to the right, everything's kind of been layered wrong, and it's representative of the women's football merch gap and how it's all a little bit skew with, and it's just all a little bit, she'd describe this a lot better than I would. I also think it looks a little bit like broken glass in the background, which I just think is like shattering that like the system that we're in, and like really kind of changing the game. And of course, this is Rep Her, which is the piece of research that was done. So 78% is my audience, I guess. The number of people, the percentage of people that would buy women's football merch were they to know where it existed, and were they able to get hold of it. So I guess my target market of FOUDYS.
yeah, I love how you got
it's a really cool piece
on the sleeve as well. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, she's absolutely sick. Like, her work is unbelievable, and again, just like another authentic layer of the work that Klarna did to choose the only platform in the world dedicated to women's football merchandise to create it, and to choose a figure in women's football that plays women's football that is a big part of our community to design it.
Yeah, I wanted to go into that as well. You said you play amateur football right now. Did you play it while you were growing up as well?
Yeah, like amateur football, my relationship to amateur football is so skew with, because when I was a little girl, I was at the Newcastle Academy with the little boys, and then that's just cut off when you're like 11. I remember I must have been 8 or 9. I would love to find the little sash, but I won like the player of the tournament in like a mixed gender tournament weekend. And I remember, I think about it now, and I'm like, I remember being at that tournament and just feeling like I didn't understand what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't understand that I was going to be cut out of the process.
Yeah.
Because my parents were just so like happy with me just exercising and being out there and doing my thing. And then it was like, yeah, you can't play anymore. Like, this is it.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was playing football when I was growing up, and I was about 10 or 11, and I played in a mixed gender team too. So we had girls on our team, and they were far better than we were. So we had one called Daisy McAllan. If I could say her name, but I'll check for permission. But she plays for Portsmouth now. I'm still in contact with her. But like, what I noticed was that looking back at it now, all the players, like us as kids, we didn't care what gender we were. We didn't care whether it was a girl or a boy playing. And even like the other teammates didn't necessarily really care too much. But what did impact was the influence the parents had on the game. You'd had like sort of men and women, to be honest with you, parents shouting like, they're girls, you can beat girls are no good at football, like, you're boys, you should be better than them.
Yeah.
Like, mainly from probably dads you hear on the sidelines saying like, you can't let yourself get tackled by a girl. Even the coaches sometimes would be saying that, a lot less coaches than parents. But that would then influence the kids, and then you'd have like the boys on the other team getting sort of more aggressive towards the girls and tackling harder. So I don't know if you've experienced any of that when you were playing, when you were growing up with the boys and stuff.
I think it's like, it's multifaceted, like in the sense of parents like mine were like just happy that I was an outdoorsy person that wanted to do sport, and like, how rare is that for a young girl? Like, in my class of school, like other girls, the mums and dads of them are also the problem, because like, it's societal that we're like not opening all children up to all things, and so we're like boxing little girls into one category and little boys into another category. So the fact that I was on the pitch, I'm not gonna like sit here and complain that I got tackled harder when I was like 10 years old or whatever. The reason that I exited football at that age is like, because of the FA, if I'm honest. Like, I think the Football Association could have done more back then to create accessibility. and enforce accessibility. Like, it's taken the Lionesses winning the Euros for every school to have this equality piece on little girls accessing football. Like, it's just madness. But then also it's like the parents of young girls and then the parents of young boys. Like, I feel really lucky that I had that experience. And there's a really well-known fact that is I see all the time on social media. It's 90% of C-suite females did team sports growing up. So like leaders of this world did team sports growing up. And like there is something in that like so many of the girls in my year, I just could see, even as a young girl, like they were blocked from it. And I was the weird outcast because I'm playing football. Like that's the killer about it. That's what's such a shame. And right now it hasn't really changed. Like it has. And the Lionesses have done so much in UK culture to do that because they're so representative of everyone. And that's incredible. But there is still, I think, like a thing when, you know, you have a little girl and it's like your dream for that little girl is that she's going to become a ballerina and I think, I hope that if when I have children that I'm just like little boy or little girl, I'm like opening them up to whatever, like he might want a Barbie, she might want to play rugby. Like,
I think that ties back into the access to merchandise quite nicely though as well, because when I was growing up, like say I was 3 years old, I'd get given a Wayne Rooney shirt. And then that would be something I look at every day. I'm like, I wish I had my name on the back of a football shirt. That was like the dream. And that's what your parents told you. Like one day your name will be on the back of that shirt if you keep playing football. So by girls having more access to merchandise and parents have more access to women's football merchandise, do you think that's going to have a big impact on like the culture and then the grassroots level will improve because of that as well?
Yeah, I can only talk about my own experiences, but like when I was a little girl, I thought that our back garden was massive. Now I'm in it, it's like 10 metres by 10 metres. I thought it was like St. James's Park.
Yeah.
And then when I was like 7, 8 years old, I had 2 big sisters not interested in football. And I would pass the ball to an imaginary Alan Shearer. And then I would pass the ball to an imaginary like Alberto Solano. And so in my head, I was like, I'll be the first woman that Newcastle ever sign. Like that's what was in when I was a little girl. Like that I'll be the first female footballer that plays for Newcastle United. And that was because you had to have a dream, right? You can't just, when you're a kid, you can't just be like, I'll be like, the end of my dream will be 12 years old.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I will play with Alan Shearer and it'll be towards the end of his career and the start of my career at St. James. That was the dream. And now, you know for a fact my little niece Abby, but you know for a fact that this is representative of every little girl that likes football, is passing to Ella Toon and is passing to Alessia Russo, and they're in their garden, in their like little imaginary world. There is a genuine end game where they're playing on the world stage in front of 90,000 people. Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, do you think so? I guess more access to merchandise means girls are more likely to have role models that are women's footballers as a result, because they'll see like Russo's shirt, and it also, I think, like you said earlier, it educates people on who the players are. Like if you're at a football game, you see someone. That's how I learned anyway. When I was younger, I saw like a Beckham shirt and I saw a Rooney shirt, and I realised, Rooney's a player, and then that kind of you progressively learn more. Do you think that will have an impact on role models as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I live in Manchester, and around Old Trafford on match day, you see the little kids and going to the men's game, and more often than not, you're seeing the little girls and the little boys wearing like the female names on the back in the female font. And it's like, it's huge for brand awareness. It's huge for the growth of the women's game, but it's just absolutely like emphasising the growth of the game and the opportunity, and that this was always wanted. And as soon as it became available to the consumer, they were like, yeah, we want this.
I'll bring it back to the work that you do and probably what you've learned over the last 3 years. How does women's football merchandise, I can't say what I was going to say, differ across various regions? I'll take it back to the work that you do. Obviously, you've been doing it for 3 years now. How does the access to merchandise and how does merchandise in women's football vary across different regions from what you've seen?
I think one of the big things I've noticed is the biggest connector to women's football is international, and the biggest connector to men's football is domestic. So people's relationship to their club is really powerful in men's football. People's relationship to the individual player, often connected to an international team, is what's important in women's football. So an example I'll give is Jordan Nobbs. When she left Arsenal and she moved to Aston Villa, all of the Arsenal fans were buying Aston Villa shirts because their love is like for Jordan Nobbs. But on top of that, we'll see a fan buy a Alessia Rousseau Arsenal shirt and an Ella Toone Manchester United shirt and then a Lucy Bronze Chelsea shirt. In men's football, that would be, you'd be like chucked out your family home, right? Like, it wouldn't happen. Yeah. And in women's football, the relationship is to those lionesses who have such a core driver in like women's football culture. On the other side, this happens in the Netherlands as well. So like we see like the Viv Miedema shirt sales going to the Netherlands, and if she's playing for City, if she's playing for Arsenal, people don't care. It's about their relationship to Viv. And so the regional aspect like kind of doesn't matter as much, but we see peaks in sales when the Lionesses come to town. And I'm really public on social media about I'm from the Northeast, and in 2019 a third of the England squad came from the northeast of England, primarily Sunderland, so down the road from my Newcastle, but they were northeast like players, and a lot of the games I felt were being played south of the Watford Gap, and I think accessibility to be able to go to the game is like a massive inspiration point. And then of course this year the Lionesses came to St James's Park, and like the proof's in the pudding. I think they sold 50,000 tickets, and the fans were obviously really waiting for this big moment for the Lionesses to come to town. We lost the game, which was really disappointing. But then after that, what you see regionally is the fans' engagement in that team like peaks, and the fans' engagement in individual players. So all of a sudden you'll see the Arsenal shirt sales go up of those Lionesses, the Manchester United shirt sales go up of those players, and almost mum and dad don't really care about getting their son or daughter that Rousseau Arsenal shirt. It just doesn't feel as close to it. I'm 34 years old, and I rang my dad the other day and I told him the bad news that I was going to be wearing the Arsenal third shirt this year. And he's just about, exactly. I was like, Dad, please. And he was like, I think he's just about forgiven me. I won't wear it in front of him, but I think that just shows like I'm a massive Newcastle fan. And in women's football, I'm just like so passionate about the movement that I'm like, I'll support the teams. Like, I just really love the movement.
That's one good thing about women's football that men's football doesn't have. Men's football is very divided because of the teams and the rivalry. Then it brings on also fights and violence at the matches and stuff. And it's not really the safest place to go for an Arsenal Spurs game nowadays. Whereas if it's a women's football game, you're always going to be safe. If you go to that sort of game, there's less of a rivalry, but it's still really enjoyable and it's a really good atmosphere.
I think they talk about atmosphere and like, what does atmosphere mean? Like, there's a lot of hate online, right? About it's dead. Like there's no atmosphere. There's no vibe. Firstly, I have been all around the world. I've watched Ronaldo in his prime, Messi in his prime. Like I'm a big men's football fan. There is no better atmosphere than the quarterfinal of the Women's Euros, England versus Spain in Brighton. I think it was the heat. It was like 30 odd degrees, but I have never experienced anything like it. Real Madrid versus Barcelona women at the new camp, 92,000 people, and it was like the air, it was so tense. I like think there's this misconception that like the atmosphere in women's football isn't great, but you're right about the safety piece. I've never ever ever gone to a women's game as either on my own as a woman or as like an LGBTQ plus person and felt unsafe. And then in men's football, on the contrary, like felt unsafe more often than I felt safe, if that makes sense, especially at away games. Like I've had some horrific moments. And I think like the Women's Euros final in July 2022, I then went to the Carabao Cup final, Man United Newcastle men's, in February 2023 with my dad and my siblings. And it was just like, I was right on the border between the two sets of fans on the Newcastle side, of course. And it was like, I just was with my 70-year-old dad, just absolutely panicked the whole time, to be honest. Like, embarrassed a little bit as well because there's the language and like, it's just not how I vibe.
Yeah, I grew up watching Aldershot, and as you can imagine, some of the Aldershot games are pretty rough. You had Aldershot versus Woking, which is a big local derby.
I lived in Guildford, I know it very well.
All it's about is fighting. Like, that's all it's about. It's not even about the football on the pitch. Like, if Aldershot scored, it would just be a bragging right to go towards the away fans, give them like the middle finger or something. You know what I mean? Like that's all it would be about. Whereas women's football, like if, I went to the Chelsea Barcelona game, and like, there was still some like, you know, obviously competitiveness. There's a difference between competitiveness and wanting your team to win and kind of not liking the other fans, but compared to like just going there for a fight. I think that's what women's football always needs to keep, is
like,
that positive
you
atmosphere.
tell me what you think, but like I've never felt at a football match when Newcastle score or when the Lionesses score, like I said, oh, do you know what I'm going to do now in this moment? I'm just going to turn around because the away fans are up there and I'm going to swear at them.
That's just stupid,
like
yeah.
in my head, I'm like, my team have scored. It feels so great. It feels like a real moment of togetherness.
Yeah.
I cannot fathom why the want would be like, oh, I want to rub it into them. Even at the weekend when we played Southampton and the Southampton, you know, there was lots of drama on the pitch with the Southampton player and the Newcastle player. My joy was, oh, my dad will be buzzing. Oh, my family will be buzzing. Like, it's about you and your people. It's about you in your space. And at the women's European final, I keep going back to it, but it was the best day of my life. The women's European final, when the final whistle went, there wasn't a I couldn't even tell you who we were playing against in that moment. I honestly could not care less. England had won the European final. I was just there with my dad and my sisters. And every time I think about it, I get emotional. I'm like, do not zoom in on me right now. And there was Germany fans in front and they shook our hands on the way out. And they were like, well, obviously not going to stay. You know, it's like, oh, like amazing game. Wow, what a game. Like that was so tense. And they were like, congratulations. You know, it was beautiful in every sense. It's like a real sporting moment. And I just think atmosphere can be peak without spilling into like visceral. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we post a lot about the Euros final, England winning it, especially when England got knocked out of the Euros. The men's team got knocked out of the recent Euros, and we were like, oh, the Lioness has done it better. But there was a lot of hate initially towards the women winning the Euros. A lot of men and women again, just people saying it's not real, it doesn't count, it's not the real game. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, like I get a lot of personal hate, but like I'm a leader in football and I'm a CEO of a business, so like I'm kind of expectant of it. Like, how sad is that? I also commentate for the BBC in the WSL as a co-coms, and I will never forget like being with a male lead commentator, and he kept on saying something that was inaccurate about the game we were covering, Man United, Man City. It was the Continental Cup, and he kept saying Man United have never beaten Man City, and what he meant to say was Man United have never beaten Man City in this competition. And he repeated it like 3 times. I remember thinking, I'm sure me and you have covered a game where Man United beat Man City. Like I can't remember, like, you know, in the moment you're not thinking. Anyway, I repeated his line because they beat Man City. I said, well, now Manchester United have beaten Manchester City for the first time. If I just said in this cup, if I just said the words in this cup. And then we come off air and I've got like 3,000, 2,000, I don't even know how many followers, not very many followers. He's got way more followers because he's the lead comms and is working full-time at the BBC. I said, oh, Dom, don't turn your phone on, mate. I said, like I've had quite a lot of abuse, you know, like get back in the kitchen, like turn the iron on, like just don't talk about football, really abusive language. I saw he didn't get a single message, not a single piece of abuse. But that is, you know, that cements it. Like for me, it's not like a negative thing. It just cements it because it's purely about being a woman. Like it's not about my knowledge or my experience or like what I have to say. It's purely about me being a woman.
Yeah,
that's
what's
it.
horrible though is I sit here and I'm just like, I'm not even surprised.
Yeah.
It's really sad that I just sit here and I'm not shocked at that the fact you got that abuse. It's just because I see it on a daily basis too. You kind of just become mute to it. Like, it happens on a daily, especially on She Scores, it happens on a daily basis. The DMs we get telling us just to delete our page and not post, and it's just like, and it's just like, why? Just don't watch it. You know what I mean? Just don't watch it.
In my line of work, I'm really fortunate to like spend time with the athletes, like behind closed doors at times. Like I just got back from Washington with the Arsenal women's team, and when you speak to them on that level about this off air, like, what you have to remember is these are elite athletes. And think about any sport. Like football's my area, so watch me like be not very knowledgeable about any other things. But I recently watched sprint on Netflix about elite runners, 100-meter runners, like 100 and 200-meter runners. And like the lead, American runner, he's like widely hated, disregarded, told, is it Noah Lyles? And he gets a lot of abuse. But like when you are an elite athlete, that's almost a motivator.
Yeah.
And if you allow yourself to turn that into motivation, it can be the best fuel to the fire, I'm telling you. And like as a business owner, I cannot tell you how many times I've been told your business isn't commercially viable. I cannot tell you, like when I launched it, and I mean this even in my like inner circle of like loved ones, family, friends, they were like, oh, that's cute. I was like, I didn't launch it to be cute. I launched it to be the biggest sports retailer in women's sports in the world. And that's the direction that it's going in. And I didn't launch it to be like, oh, it's really nice that you're like doing that. I launched it to be like a mainstay, a platform for women's football fans and women's sports fans and women's sports users to access and be spotlighted all year round. Because I was sick of going on sports retail websites and during the Women's World Cup, men on the homepage, men's football boots, men's faces. I'm like, the Women's World Cup is on right now. Like England are into the final and it's Ronaldo's face on the homepage of the main sports retail website. And so I didn't launch to be cute, but like when people abuse me or when people say like, it's not commercially viable or you're not good enough or you're really annoying or whatever, I'm like, that is fuel to my fire.
Yeah.
Like it's just further pushing me to evidence that we're kick-ass and what we're doing is really, really important and viable.
Yeah, it is a shame that has to happen, but it's good that you're obviously using it to motivate you. I was going to quickly go on to about the Euros. How did the 2022 winning the Euros impact like your business, and did it bring more sales than you ever seen before? I imagine there was a spike there. And then what do you think will happen if next year Lionesses win it again? Like, how do you think that will impact the merchandise as well?
I'm smiling because I'm like, let's
I think
go
it
there.
will happen, to be honest. So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think Spain might get in our way this time, but
no chance.
we'll
You've
see.
seen our team.
Yeah, we're stacked, so fingers crossed. Like, I can't wait.
Yeah.
The 2022 Euros absolutely impacted the business, but I don't think it can be overstated how much we were already going in that direction. But it was the reason it was under the radar wasn't because it wasn't successful. I'd already hired employees by then, and I was through one investment round. So like, I think this is a misconception that like the Euros, what it did is it rocketed us to the front pages as a sport. But women's football, because of the likes of Susie Rack at The Guardian and incredible writers that were telling these stories, it was already getting headlines on the Saturdays and Sundays, the domestic league. We'd had our investment round. I'd already signed with Nike at that point, and we were on the verge of signing with Adidas and the others as well. So it was already going in that direction. What the Euros did was put like a rocket up everyone's ass. I think everyone was just like, oh my God, like the opportunity was here and we could see the growth of women's sport. And I think it is important to be like, it is sport as a whole. And the Olympics is evidence that even more. Like, the women's movement in sport is incredible.
Yeah.
But what the women's Euros did, I remember there was a waiting list of 50,000 people for that final.
Wow.
And like, we were like, when we bought tickets, I remember calling my dad and I was like, right, I've got tickets for the final, like 15 quid or whatever, that, we're ready for it a year in advance. I went back on a month later and I got 2 more tickets because I'd hired 2 team members and I was like, oh, I'm going to give them tickets next year. I won't tell them. And then cut forward a year and it was like, you could not move. I passed the quarterfinal. On the ground at Manchester Laces, the football club that I started, we were already big. We had 100 odd members. I was in London for the Brighton game, the quarterfinal. The day after the Brighton game, apparently 40 plus people just turned up at the football pitch. Adult women being like, can we play? And I think that is the movement of that game just catapulted it forward. We were already in a place at Manchester Laces where the club was big, but what the Euros did was when, like, I am a 45-year-old woman, I am a 50-year-old woman, I'm a 21-year-old woman. Like, I want to do that. How have I missed out on this as a youth? it's epic,
That's
and they were
just-
starting to come along.
That's because they never had women's football wasn't on TV 15 years ago. I mean, or 20 years ago, there was no women's football games really on, apart from like the odd FA Cup here and there. But
Well,
it wasn't really on.
There were women that were coming to the pitch that were saying when we were little girls it was illegal.
Yeah,
we weren't allowed to play, like it was banned. It was outlawed in the UK.
Banned for 50 years. I mean, that I only learnt that like last year when I started She Scores. Like I went 24 years not knowing about the ban of women's football, which is crazy when it was a 50-year ban. And I've learnt that, and I post that on She Scores a lot now, and people still haven't. Like, they realise it's the first time they've known about that. It's like, how is that not more widely spoken about, the fact that there was a ban for 50 years on women's football?
You know what's so really interesting to me from the merchandise perspective is, and I've studied this a lot because I'm so fascinated by football shirt culture. Apparently Kevin Keegan was like the first time that people started to be like, I want a copy of his shirt. So before that, people used to go, you know, to a Leeds game in a white t-shirt, or they would go in like just whatever clothes they wanted. And then the replica came in, and people said it was because this Kevin Keegan came on, he was such a hunk, and everyone really wanted to be like Kevin Keegan. So it was like they got the haircut and they got the shirt, and Leeds started making these replicas. Women's football was still like, England national team didn't exist when this happened. So when you talk about an industry, like even the football shirt industry, well, obviously has a however many years, 30-year head start on women's football merch, because 2019 was the first time women got their own shirts. But like there was an entire era of football shirt culture before women's football even existed. And that's like in itself absolutely mad. And like when you look at like Kelly Smith, there's like stories of her in training, like she used to borrow Thierry Henry's Arsenal shirt, like, and it would hang off her. And like that was the greatest England women's player arguably to ever exist, who basically fled England because there was nothing here and went to America to go and play. Age 14, 15 years old. I mean, these are the stories, like this is our legacy. And no wonder we're in a position both in merchandise where I'm like shouting from the rooftops and people are like, oh, that's cute. And people aren't really believing its commercial viability. And then on the other side where like we have so much undoing to do because our roots and our history is quite dark.
Yeah, I mean, the 1920s were massive for women's football too. It was a golden generation where they had sort of 50,000 people turning up at games and stuff. I mean, I think that's where we're heading in that direction now. Like, we're almost there, really, I'd say, is like now you get, like you said, St. James's Park, where it's 50,000 people, because you don't see it up north too much. Like, you don't see the line at Leicester Scarpa that much, and they did, and then it sold out. Where do you see the merchandise, women's football merchandise in 10 years' time? And like, what do you want to do to drive it to that direction? What impact do you think you can have on it?
I absolutely think that brands like Nike, Puma, Adidas, I think they're recognising this, but having our own platforms that are specific to our users is really important. I don't think there's any other sphere where this would happen other than when it relates to women, of course, where like there is a product over here. I use Sports Direct, but that's a bit mean because it's actually all of them, where they know their target market. They're so set on the target market, and their target market is like a totally different political leaning, age group, gender, interests outside of sport. Like everything, every single aspect of that person is different to what I'm offering at FOUDYS. So people always talk about like your competitors. I'm like, I don't really see them as competitors because I'm talking to a totally different person. And to the people that Pro Direct, Sports Direct, Fanatics, etc. are talking to. So I think that the way we'll go in 10 years is, I don't doubt we'll get a competitor. Like, I don't doubt someone else will come into the women's sports space and create a specific platform dedicated to women's football and women's sports fans. It'll happen, which is great because
it's kind of almost good in a way, isn't it?
There's enough of us. There's enough to go around. So, and like I think that's the direction we'll go in. I think we'll become a household name at FOUDYS. I don't doubt that, to be honest. I think that's like a big statement to make, but I do think that's not attributed to me and like my success or my personal like marketing or sales ability. I think that's because of the growth of the game, because it's just so rapidly growing that this audience is just going to be a household thing.
Yeah.
And that's super exciting.
And obviously Klarna being involved in this shirt, like such a big company, big name out there, like them being involved, and how does that, what message does that send to the rest of the bigger brands out there? It's obviously a positive one, but how much of an impact do you think this can have on the women's foot merchandise space?
I think I'm really proud to be working with Klarna on this project. And like, as I said before, I think like the authenticity of it is really, really clear and really honest, and like using it to back research just feels like so helpful, and just it really sort of, as I said, boosts what we're doing, but also like the consumer hopefully sees and reads that research and is like, okay, cool, these are the options out there, and we're one of them. So like I can't thank them enough for their support, and really, really proud to be like associated to this piece of research. But I just think long may it continue, like long may it continue that brands get heavily involved in the women's game, that empower not only young girls, but women too. I want to emphasize that, because I think like a lot of stuff comes out, like I've seen a lot of videos recently about new pitches opening and how this is going to affect the next generation. I just like really strongly believe that our generation can impact young girls as much as the next generation. Like my niece looks up to me as a footballer and listens to my every word. I'm rubbish, by the way. Like I'm not a very good footballer, but she's like 7 and she's like, you're mint. Like I want to be just like Auntie Helen. And I think our generation needs to be listened to as well. Like I think it's about the next generation, but empowering adult women as well to sort of carry that forward. And that's what this research is really like opening up as well, that like adult women as well are looking for access to this sport that they never had access to before. And I'm so grateful, because I could never have afforded to do this research. So it's just a massive like string to our bow, I guess.
So how did Klarna get in touch with you for this project?
Well, I think actually it was a few years ago that I first met them at the Women's Football Awards. I think they were one of the lead sponsors, and we won an award. Manchester Laces, my football club, won Inclusive Football Club of the Year, which was a huge honour. And when we first came off the stage, we were like taken out the back to be interviewed, and we did not think we were going to win. So we'd just been like enjoying the free wine and like, having a really good time. And we were met by Klarna, and we just had the funniest interview. And I think it went on their social channels. And that was like the first time I kind of like been in contact with them. But I'd known that they existed because the person that my business is named after, Julie Foudy, is the founder of Angel City Football Club in Los Angeles, and she's an ex-US Women's National Team player. And of course, Klarna sponsor Angel City, who are like one of the most iconic like women's football teams in the world now. So I'd been over to Angel City a few times, and I've been wearing the like Klarna shirts and stuff. So they've been heavily involved in the space for a long time. And I think in terms of how the relationship kind of meshed together, they'd done their research through Rep Her on the women's football merchandise scene. And I think our name had just come up loads of times. Like FOUDYS had just kept on coming up in their research. And it was just the perfect storm, really. Like, I think they hadn't initially thought to contact us, but they'd known that, you know, I'd existed in this space, and the research like pumped out our name, which is obviously a huge compliment, shows that we're out there, and that people are recognising us as the go-to in women's football merchandise.
Yeah, but I do really love the shirt. I mean, I think
I
keep looking at it and I'm like, it's actually, I love the design of it. I think we need our kits, the team I play for, looking like this.
I'll reach out to FOUDYS.
Yeah.
We make kits as well.
Where can anyone listening or watching get the shirt and support, you know, all the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so this is available on FOUDYS, FOUDYS, and all of the proceeds are actually going to the Laces community. So the Laces community isn't just Manchester Laces, it's South London Laces and Hackney Laces and Limehouse Laces and Manchester Laces. So there's 4 of us. Limehouse Laces supports young people, as does Hackney Laces, and South London Laces and Manchester Laces are both adult women's football clubs. So it's basically being pumped back into UK-based, like national football clubs that are supporting inclusive women's football and girls' football spaces. So amazing again from Klarna, but all proceeds will go towards those clubs.
Awesome, cool. Thank you for joining me today. It's been really, really informative. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.